first message that he did not want Washington to think Kyiv was against the deal. The conditions are constantly changing. I thought that we have a mobilized on these points. Macron said Russia's $250 billion in frozen assets could be used for future reconstruction as part of a peace deal. In time, Ukraine and increase the pressure on Russia.
We've agreed that we must go further now to support the peace process, support Ukraine, and increase the pressure on Russia to get serious. That means, first, stepping up the military pressure. So the Defence Secretary
European efforts to create security arrangements for Ukraine have been shifting away from sending troops to other alternatives as they face political and logistical constraints and the prospect of Russia and the US opposing their plans. Even so, co-host French President Emmanuel Macron said a number of countries had agreed to pursue a Franco-British idea for what he called a reassurance force that would be deployed in the event of a peace deal to deter future Russian aggression. Today, these reassurance forces are a French-British proposition. It has been agreed by Great Britain and France. It is desired by Ukraine, and it has also been agreed by several member states that have signaled their desire to join in. There is no unanimity on it today. That is known, but we do not need unanimity to do this. Macron urged Europe to brace for the possibility of diminished U.S. involvement in security matters, emphasized on the need for strategic independence. We have to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. And so, my wish is for the Americans to be engaged by our side, and my wish is for the Americans to provide support or even active participation in all of this, because it is good for their European allies. It is good for NATO. It is good for all of us. But we have to prepare for a situation a strong Ukrainian army in the long term would look.